We spent a lot of time on this, so I'm going to jump
Yeah,
to the
move
next
on.
topic, but I'm going to be really quick on it. Is obviously if a lender's going to give you a big loan for a home, they want to know that you have a steady job, right? That you're going to be able to pay that off. And so one of the things that a lender looks at like you is, hey, do you have a job? You're going to actually call and verify employment for that job,
Hmm.
making sure that what they told you is real and a consistent job history. Now that might not be the same company, but if it's a related or related industry and you can show that yes I was doing this job here and I got a better job over here doing similar things, then they're still going to be okay. But a lot of people are self-employed. I'm self-employed. Are there loan programs for that? You
Yeah.
mentioned earlier that there's, like we kind of need 3% down. Are there loan programs if I don't have money down? Because I've also run into some buyers that have been so fiscally responsible but not educated, and they have worked their butts off. They're now 30 years
Mhm.
old, saving every dime. They're like, "Yep, we've almost got our 20% down saved up." And I'm just like,
Oh,
"Oh, you could have owned a home 6 years ago
lost
and
out
had
on all that.
$200,000 in equity by
Yeah.
now."
So
And
a couple
they've been
things. Oh,
working
go ahead.
so hard to save up their 20 or $30,000 when they could have had $200,000 in equity. So let's talk about that. First of all, I don't really know if we need to go in the job thing, but the self-employment thing I think is very common.
Yeah.
And then also this idea that I have to have 3% down minimum or whatever.
Well, let me talk about that too a little bit. So the average first time home buyer in Utah right now is 36 years old. Nationwide, it's 38. 20 years ago, that number was like in the mid 20s. And what's happened is people are just delaying that purchase decision for a variety of reasons. One of it being, obviously prices have gone up and income has not every year gone up, but prices and income have stayed relatively, surprisingly, it's closer than people think. It's closer than the media is going to tell you as far as what your buying power is. But that delay is causing people to really lose out on a lot of opportunity. And one of the biggest reasons for delay is that you just mentioned is the down payment, the perception that not having enough money down is going to keep them from buying a house. Ideally, having 3 to 5% down when you're buying a home for the first time would be perfect. Having more money down, of course, it's going to give you a better payment. It's going to save you some money, and that's not a bad idea if you have it. But I wouldn't delay buying specifically for the purpose of saving money. In a market that's going up by 3.5 to 4.5% annually every year, it is impossible to outsave the market. So, for example, the $500,000 home, for someone to save 4% or even 3%, they've got to save $15,000 a year just to keep even with the market growth on a home. So if they say, well, I'm going to wait next year until I've saved another $20,000, awesome. You just broke even on all that money and you spent a year eating rice and beans and it didn't benefit you. And so delaying that purchase decision specifically for the purpose of creating more money down if you've got the minimum is probably not the best idea. That said, there are options for 100% financing, and there are a lot of good ones. If you're a veteran, if you live in certain areas like rural Utah, you can get 100% financing. In certain areas, there's grant program or down payment assistance programs to provide down payment. In general terms, if you're not a veteran and you're not buying in a rural area, which in Utah is everything outside of Salt Lake, Davis, Weber, Utah County, everywhere else is rural. If you're not in those two categories, your payment will be significantly better if you have 3% down versus no money down. But that doesn't mean you can't buy. There's programs for 100% financing for first time home buyers. You just have to look at it and say, okay, what's my cost going to be if I don't put money down? Now, what's my cost going to be if I put 3% down? And is it worth coming up with that 3% to save the money? Generally speaking, if you have the option of coming up with 3%, it's going to be worth it. The math plays out that way. But just waiting to save more money is probably not going to be the best way to go unless you're just trying to just get in the door. As far as the income piece goes, when you're getting a mortgage, there's really a few factors you have to overcome. You got to have the income, you've got to have the assets for the down payment, you have to have the credit. Those three things are just that you have to have them. And some people think, well, I have really good credit, so that means I don't need as good income, or I have a lot of money down, so I don't need as good credit. That's kind of true, but mostly not. Those three things operate independently. In other words, you need the down payment over here, you need the credit here, and you need the income separately. And if you don't have all three of those, you just don't get the loan. When it comes to self-employed income, that's calculated differently than most people would think. When I talk to borrowers who are self-employment and who have like a secondary job, they look at it and they go, well, last month I made X amount of money, so that's how much money I make. What the underwriter is going to look at is they're going to look at the history of your income for the last 2 years. And they're going to say, what's your history of making this type of income over the last 2 year period of time? Is it consistent? You mentioned that. Is it likely to continue at that level? And they're going to do a little bit of an analysis based off your tax return or your bank statements. And then they use that number to determine what the income is going to be for qualifying. So it's a little more complex than what I think people would suspect. And the challenge with that is when you're self-employed, and you and I are both self-employed, the incentive is to be as careful. I'm going to say this in the right way, to be as careful in your accounting as possible so that you're maximizing your allowed deductions, right? In other words, you want to minimize your tax burden in a legal way. Well, by doing that, that's great. But what you're also doing, you're telling the underwriter you make less money because when you're taking a deduction or write off, that's not money you get to qualify for the loan. So you have to strike the balance between those two things of how am I maximizing my tax situation and how am I qualifying for a mortgage. And in some cases, you just have to make the decision that good mortgage planning isn't necessarily good tax planning and then act accordingly. Same thing as before. The best thing to do if somebody wants to get started and they're thinking, I'd like to be able to buy a house 1 year, 2 years, 3 years from now. I am self-employed or I'm working in this situation. Have a conversation with a really good, solid professional mortgage person and find out what should I be doing right now so that I'm ready when I want to be buying, or if I want to be buying right away, what do I actually qualify for based on my situation? And that's going to help a ton rather than just guesswork.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I liked about you. You weren't the first mortgage lender that I worked for. It was
That's right.
pre 2000s, I think, and I worked for a couple of different companies, and it was shocking to me, frankly, that when I worked for you, it was the very first time I saw the back end of things, right?
Mm,
That there's
okay.
points and stuff, but you were the first person that ever sat down with people and said, "Okay, here's how much rates are. If you got a little bit higher rate, you could have less closing costs. If you got a little bit lower rate, you could increase your closing costs. And here's the break-even point over time." But you were the first person that really sat down and kind of pulled back the curtains and said, "This is how it works," and help educate people to make a good decision like that. And I see the same kind of thing here when we're talking about a self-employed person. It is so important to talk to somebody that knows what they're doing and can say, "All right, yeah, you're going to get hit a little bit more with taxes, but you need to work together with your CPA. We need to report at least this much income. You're earning it, so we need to report it." And it's all a strategy. We're
Yeah.
going into it again. We're taking that peek under the bed. It's scary. There's no monsters, but we're now approaching it with knowledge,
Yeah.
saying,
Get
"Okay, I've
information.
got some work to do over the next couple of years so that I can be prepared to buy a house." One of the things that we mentioned as we were talking earlier about this is watching your debt. We live
Mm,
in this society where we have to have things now. Our attention span is what, 5 seconds on
not
TikTok,
good. Not good.
and here
My
we're doing
attention span
we're
is not good.
doing a
Like we're
30-minute
talking
video
here,
here and
I'm like,
educating people.
yeah,
Um, but everybody wants stuff now,
yeah.
and so we're encouraging again. I want my son to watch this, and I want him to know you don't have to have a car as nice as your dad's right now. Like I had a beater. I had a car when I graduated high school. It
Oh,
wasn't even my car, but it was a car as old as me. And I
perfect.
had to wear a really warm hat on in the winter because I had to scrape the front of the window and the outside of the window. I mean, inside and outside. So I'm driving down the road, scraping the inside of my window and the outside of my window in order to get to school. That's the kind of car that I
That's
started
the
with.
car you need. It's
Yeah.
funny. My kids talk about dad lore all the time. They're like, "Oh, dad lore." I guess I don't know. It's a kid thing. They want to hear the stories about all the crazy weird stuff that happened back in the day. Well, those crazy weird stories only happen if you actually go and do the stuff like buy the car that doesn't have air conditioning. I drove to Arizona in a car that had no air conditioning, so I froze a couple of bottles of water, and that's what I sat on the whole way through, and it probably caused severe injuries. But hey, it worked. Uh, so I love what you're saying. The idea that a little bit of delayed gratification. It doesn't mean you don't get a car. It just means you get the right car. You don't stop. You don't not buy a house until you can buy the house you grew up in that mom and dad spent 20 years buying.
Yeah.
You buy the house that works for you right now and you work your way into it. And that's why I think people are waiting to be 38 years old to buy a home because they're waiting until they can buy the house instead of buying the beater house that
My first
used to be
house,
the starter home.
850 square feet.
It's a
Yep.
mansion. Perfect.
2 bedrooms, one little tiny bathroom that had so many problems. But that was my first house, and that got us started, you know. And from then, you just leverage it. I think for tax reasons, they let you sell every couple of years without
Hmm.
paying capital gains, and I did that, and I just kept rolling it. And
Yeah.
anyways, yeah, it takes a while, but wanting everything now is one of the worst expectations that somebody can have. holds them back from making wise decisions.
Yeah,
Getting
you want
some-
everything now, you're going to get nothing of value for the long term.
Yeah, your best helper in getting what you want long term is the simple thing now, because that's
Oh,
going
that's
to.
smart.
And so, anyways, one of the last things that I wanted to cover here. So we're talking about, okay, just getting knowledge, right? You have to know what your credit score is. You have to know how credit scores are built. You have to plan on having a job for a couple of years. Even if you're self-employed, you've got to strategically think about this. So we're being very intentional with the way we live in order to have what we want. It's not going to come by accident. It's going to come by intent. Now,
Eric, I think people hear that and they think, oh, that sounds hard. I don't want to do that. But the reality is taking that approach is so much easier than not, right? Like the haphazard, do what you want to do whenever you want to do it. It only works for a while and then it gets really, really hard. I tell people all the time, you got to choose your heart.
choose your
You
heart.
can
I
have a
was just
little
going to say
hard
that.
now, right? Yeah, we're dads. We know. Choose your heart.
Yeah.
A little bit of
Yes.
hard now, a lot of easy later. Or a little bit of easy now, a lot of hard later. Waiting until you're 38 to buy your first house. You know, that's going to be the hard you pick if you don't plan ahead.
Yeah, and the real hard is the extra 15 years of renting next to people that you don't love. That's the real hard, right?
Yeah.
Now you do have some help along the way. And I'm not going to tout my own services, but I want to tout the services of what a real estate agent does.